So it's my delight to welcome back Stephen Asma. This is his third time here. Professor Asma is a professor of philosophy at Columbia College, Chicago, where he is also senior fellow of the research group in Mind, Science, and Culture. Asma is the author of 10 books, including The Evolution of Imagination, The Emotional Mind, Affective Roots of Culture and Cognition with Rami Gabriel, which is forthcoming, on monsters and on natural history of our worst fears, and The Gods Drink Whiskey. Who knew? He writes regularly for the New York Times, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and Skeptic Magazine, and his work has been translated into German, Spanish, Hebrew, Czech, Romanian, Hindu, Portuguese, Korean, and Chinese. Stephen has been an invited lecturer at such venues as Harvard University, Brown University, the Field Museum, the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, Fudan University, to name only a few. In addition, Stephen is a blues and jazz musician who has played on stage with many musical artists, including Bo Diddley and Buddy Guy. And so it is my pleasure once again to welcome Stephen to tell us why we need religion. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Svetlana, and thank you guys for having me back. It's been a while since I was here. I think last time I was talking about Galileo, and the time before that I can't remember what I talked about. Well, was that it? Okay. So this is obviously a very controversial topic, especially for this group. The topic of the talk is why we need religion. I left off the title and just left the subtitle on. This is a book that just came out in June, so it hasn't been out very long. It has been really interesting to see the feedback that I've gotten. When it came out, I wrote a piece in the New York Times and in the Los Angeles Times that was sort of sketching this argument. And the guy at the New York Times told me he had to shut down the server because there was so much mail so fast as a result of it. And it took us a while to actually peek at the comments, because those of you who read comments of online stuff know that it's not the best that human nature can provide. And so the results were like basically ranged from "you are an idiot" to "thank you for writing this" as a defense of religion. And I'm basically going to try to sketch the argument in general and then give like a small little case study to try to illustrate the point more specifically. This is related to, I've done basically like a series of books over the last few years. They've all been in process over the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years. The one here, The Evolution of Imagination, came out with University of Chicago Press last year, and in that one I'm trying to understand how did the imagination evolve? Why do we have imaginations? What are their what's the adaptive significance of being able to imagine stuff? What is the relationship between imagination and other kinds of cognition? So it's very much an evolutionary story. Then this book, Why We Need Religion, just came out, as I said, in June. In this one I'm trying to understand like how did religion evolve and why does it still persist? And finally, the sort of culmination is this book coming out in April called The Emotional Mind. So this is my trilogy, and then I'm retiring and never writing another thing. This last one is on sort of a general theory about how did the mind evolve. And my colleague and I, who's a psychologist, think that the picture of the mind that most people have is just it's not so much wrong as provincial. The sort of reigning paradigm of the mind is that it's a computer. And what we think is missing is the emotional, affective springs of the human mind, the primate mind, of the mammal mind. So this book is sort of about that. And so you can see a theme here, which is I'm very much coming at culture from the point of view of a Darwinian. That is my background, my degrees in philosophy of biology, and a lot of my books are on evolution theory. And I think that there's a way in which cultural life and cognitive life can be understood by looking at it through the lens of biology. All right, so to the topic at hand, which is religion. So these are the traditional apologia. Why do people think religion is worth having? The first is probably the most sort of religiously orthodox, which is many people will defend religion on the grounds that it's just true. So that's like the obvious one. Anybody who, of course, is not in that religion will find that deeply unsatisfying. So if you're a Christian, you think that the truth of religion is bound up in the Gospels. If you're, Jewish, then you think it's in the Torah. If you're a Muslim, you think the Quran contains truth, and that's why the religion of Islam should be respected and engaged in. I have no interest in defending religion on this grounds. I take it as obvious to this group why I'm not going to do that. And the second way in which people will oftentimes defend religion is that it's a kind of pre-scientific explanation. Before we had science, people would say, well, we had to explain the weather. How are we going to get good crops? Questions of fertility. I've lived a lot in Southeast Asia and in East Asia, and it's very common there for people to engage in religion as a way of controlling nature, biology. People will make sacrifices, go to temple when they're trying to basically conceive a baby. It's very common for farmers to engage in religion because they're trying to basically ensure a good harvest. So in a sense, there was a way in which when people had naturalistic questions, how did the universe start? What about the cosmos? Religion sort of came in with answers. And before science, they were the best answers we had. So in that sense, it can be considered a kind of pre-science that's now outmoded and replaced by the sciences. But that's basically, I'm quite sure that's true, that religion does not serve that function anymore. The only place where people are still doing this, and I do recommend a visit, is the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where you will see that this is alive and well in Kentucky. I had the good fortune of going there when it first opened. I have not been to Noah's Ark, but apparently that's the new one that Ken Ham has put there. So it's only a very small number of people that are still using religion in this way. Thirdly, though, many people have suggested, and this includes many hardcore atheists, that religion, for all its faults, has been a pretty good moral guide. So even people like Freud thought religion is false, but it's valuable in terms of helping human beings cooperate. Presumably it's something like fear of hell and the desire for heaven is a great motivator for you to overcome your narcissistic, hedonistic drives and get along with people better. So in that sense, religion has been defended as a kind of moral compass. And then finally, religion is a cooperative social cohesion. This is the kind of thesis that Durkheim suggested. Many of you are familiar with this, that whatever its other faults are, it basically brings people together into a social group, and as such, they have a better likelihood of getting along, sharing resources, and that kind of thing. Now, my own view is that a few of these are entirely reasonable, particularly, I suppose, the last three. And I do think that religion is very good at creating social cohesion, and it has served as a good moral compass. But the reason why it's done this is because it is essentially an emotional management system. And this is the sort of story about religion that's not really told very much. And so the book that I've written is trying to go through the major emotions that we share with mammals and try to show, like, emotion by emotion, how does religion help human beings manage their emotions? You won't have social cohesion if you don't actually have emotional bonding among the group. And this is true whether it's a religious group or whether it's a bowling team. You need some affection. And so that's what I'm trying to study in this book, is how does religion manage these feelings, not just beliefs. In fact, my own view is that people are deeply confused about what religion is. Not just we as agnostics, but also religious believers are confused because they think and we think that religion is about beliefs. And I don't think that's what it's about at all. I think beliefs are entirely derivative of the social practices and activities of religion. So I'll sort of focus on that a little bit. How did I get to this point? Because like you, I had a fraught, relationship with religion. I'm kind of a, raised Catholic from Chicagoland, lapsed Catholic, and fairly hostile to religion. I'm in print, sort of running it down here and there, certainly in my early career. So my argument is not like, young rebel gets old and finds religion. It's not the argument I'm making. I actually am trying to develop a kind of Darwinian defense of religion here, which I think will be clearer here in a moment. But the way I came to it was that I left this country, and as I said before, I lived in Cambodia. I've lived in Cambodia. I've traveled a lot in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Laos. I was just in Burma, Bhutan. I've lived in China. I have a very different view of religion than I had 20 years ago. And it's those travels that have given me this picture of religion. In many ways, what I saw, particularly in the developing country, was the way in which religion helped people. Now, I could not see that in Chicago as a Catholic. Religion seemed like empty ritual and hypocrisy combined together on Sunday, and really it didn't seem to be valuable in any way. But when I went to the developing world, I began to see, Buddhism is really helping these people. Like, they need it in a way that I could not see here in the States. I think it is helping people here in the States, but I was too close to it. And, well, when you travel in a really exotic place, things really jump out at you. So Cambodia is a place where there's tremendous beauty, as you see here, Angkor Wat temples. The Angkor Empire produced an amazing, rich, deep culture. The Buddhism there is everywhere you look. Unlike China, where you would have no idea that there was ever religion there, in Cambodia or in Southeast Asia, everywhere you look is Buddhism. But there is tremendous poverty, as you can see here on the left. These are kids going through a garbage dump. Everybody I met in Cambodia had lost somebody during the Khmer Rouge period. Family members, I think it was one third of the entire population was killed during the Khmer Rouge period and the subsequent war with the Vietnamese. So there's a tremendous amount of suffering there. And I began to see that religion had a role to play there. Not just Buddhism, but actually there were Catholic missions there that were doing a tremendous amount of good. Now, I should hasten to say that there was some fairly horrifying evangelical stuff there. Some evangelical Protestants would sort of swoop in on places like Cambodia where there was fractured social stability, interested in this, but rather just humanitarian work, how to help people and help people help themselves, and so on. So that was one area that really changed my thinking. And then the other area that really changed my thinking was about 10 years ago, I started to study emotional neuroscience, affective neuroscience. And I had the great privilege of working with the father of affective neuroscience, Dr. Jaak Panksepp. And Jaak Panksepp passed away now about a year and a half ago. But before he died, we were able to do some projects together, wrote some things together and presented. And his research on animal emotions was transformative for me. So don't worry, we're not going to go through this. Don't panic. This is kind of intense to throw this on a PowerPoint slide. All I want to show you is that if you can make this out, on the far left-hand side, you will see a list of what Panksepp said were the 7 basic emotions that we share with all other mammals. And this would include at the top there what he calls the general motivation system of seeking, which is underwritten then. If you sort of go across, moving to the right, you'll see what are the neural networks, the parts of the brain that are activated during this emotion, which is sort of like that drive of curiosity that you have to search out something, whether it's food or whether it's information. And then you'll see on the hard right, sort of what are the neuromodulators? What are the actual neurotransmitters involved when you're having these kinds of emotions? So, for example, in the first emotion, it's dopamine that spikes while you're having this feeling. And when dopamine depletes, then this drive out into the environment to search for things diminishes. So, too, you'll see below seeking rage or anger, fear, lust, what he calls the care system, or we might call it love, and finally separation or panic, and play. These are the 7. So if you've seen, there's some debate about this. The neuroscientists sort of think, well, maybe 2 of these could go together, and maybe one of these is a mixture of the other 2. And those of you who perhaps have seen the Pixar movie Inside Out know that the postulate there is that there's 4 basic emotions, I think, right? And that was based on research that the filmmakers did with Paul Ekman and some of these other affective neuroscience folks. So there's some debate about how many basic emotions we have, but there's no debate that the brain has evolved to have these emotions. Why? Because they are adaptive. If you look at this chart of the brain here on your right, you'll find that we think there's basically it's sort of a tripartite brain. The old brain, which we sometimes call the reptile brain, handles fight or flight stuff. We share this with all vertebrates. The limbic system is basically where the emotions and memory is sort of housed. And then in human beings, we have this really elaborate neocortex where particularly the frontal areas where planning and thinking about the future occur. So your brain is a kludge of these 3 systems, roughly speaking. I mean, they're not really discrete. The brain is very interwoven, obviously. And we share these emotions then from the limbic system with other mammals. Now, what I think is wrong with most analyses of religion is that they look at it as if it were a neocortical phenomenon, because that's where beliefs occur. You have a belief, Jesus is the Son of God, or Muhammad is the prophet, or something like that. But that's not actually where I think religion is doing its good work. It's really in this older brain, the emotional systems, where religion is extremely powerful as a cultural apparatus. So how does it do this? How we feel is as important to our survival as how we think. And on the left-hand side, you'll see some of the adaptive emotional regulation that religion can do. And then I'm going to just briefly sort of tick off some of the therapeutic religious practices that do this adaptive work. So my argument is essentially religion is around because it helps us handle these emotions. Consolation for suffering. That's fairly obvious, I think. Many people can see this. I guess one quick story, if I can. I was at a college on the East Coast lecturing people about the stupidity of religion at some point, and this student came up to me afterwards, and he said, it was really a humbling experience. This kid said that his brother had been brutally stabbed to death and murdered a few years before. And this was he was in a family, it was him, his sister, the older brother, and it was a single mother raising them. And when the brother had been murdered, his mother, he was a young boy at that time, I guess he was probably like 13 or something, and his mother went into a tailspin, as you would imagine, and really could not get out of bed, could not function, could not make food, was not eating, really just catatonic levels of depression. And the boy said that he himself was not a believer, but that he saw that his mother pulled herself together by the use of religion, that it was her belief that she would see her son again, but moreover, it was the religious community that kept coming around to their house and sort of getting her up and, engaging with her, embracing her, talking with her about the future. And slowly but surely, the mother rallied and was eventually able to then reconnect with her own children and take care of them. So the survival of this family depended on how well the mother did as a result of this crisis. And the boy's argument, which had a lot of impact on me, was that religion was extremely valuable to the survival of his family. So this had a big influence on my thinking. Religion also reduces stress and depression. There's a lot of empirical work coming out on this now. I think a lot of people sort of had a general sense this might be true, but there's actual social psychology that's testing a lot of this now. Religion glues together social communities. It provides meaning, both global and local, inspires hope. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit. It focuses aggression and fear on enemies. This doesn't sound like a good thing, perhaps. I mean, you might be thinking, that's exactly why I hate religion. But you have to think of this like a Darwinian. Religion is like a tool, just like sharp teeth are a tool, or claws are a tool, or a weapon is a tool. And my argument is not that religion is automatically going to give us the goals of liberal democracy. That's not my argument. My argument is that religion will help people and groups survive. If that gets ugly, the Darwinian imperative doesn't care. Like, that's just how groups survived. So I just want to be clear, like, I'm not sitting here saying religion always ends up making us like into a kumbaya love fest where we all really love each other. I'm not naive. That's not how it works. But nonetheless, it is occasionally the case that you have real enemies. And then aggression, like rage, just like this system back here, is extremely useful and valuable to you. So as a cultural apparatus, religion can point it in the right direction. It can also point it in the wrong direction. It provides surrogates for social dysfunction. We can talk about that more later. Pain relief, self-discipline regarding desire. One of the things that religion has notoriously done is helped people overcome lust and libidinal issues. Now, that's also caused for repression and psychosis of various kinds. But if you think about it like an anthropologist, you do have to manage the lust that you're given as a sort of biological inheritance. Because if you acted on every lust impulse you had, then the group would not flourish or survive. And you probably wouldn't last very long either. So there's a sense in which managing lust has been a sort of religious cultural project for thousands of years. And I know we recognize the problems with it, but also we have to recognize the advantages of it as well. So what are the therapeutic religious practices that pull this off? Prayer and meditation, music festivals, collective liturgy. Because I'm trying to emphasize the activity of religion, not just the belief, although beliefs are part of it. Grieving customs, and here we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Life transition customs, going from being a child to an adult, getting married, this kind of stuff. Sacrifices, fasting, and giving. These are ways in which one trains their emotions. You have to engage in these activities in order to develop emotions that are under control. Forgiveness, imagery and imagination, magical thinking. All right, these are all ways in which religion sculpts the emotions. What are the goods that come from it? So these are the benefits of religion, none of which apparently I'm going to enjoy because, like you, I can't convince myself to believe something I don't believe in. But there's a lot of data that suggests that you live longer if you're religious. I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff. Also, you seem to have better health if you're religious. I'm not making this up. Look it up. There's less crime. You stayed married longer. And you give more. And actually, this last one, there's a substantial difference between how much religious people give and how much a-religious people give. And it's not what you're thinking. It's not, oh, they just give more to their church. That's actually not what the data shows. They actually give more to all kinds of causes, stuff that they're not even, that isn't related to their religion at all. So these are just, if you want to know what's the short list of benefits, these are the short list of benefits. Now, what I want to do is just give you a kind of short, case study to show you how this works. And so we could pick any of those 7 emotions, like fear or care or lust, and we could go through, because that's what I do in the book. Each chapter picks an emotion. So there's a whole chapter on rage, and there's a whole chapter on lust. And I'm trying to explain how does religion sort of manage these emotions. But for our purposes here, I just picked grief as a way to show that religion is there for people and helpful with regard to grief. So what you're looking at here is a kind of pathway through the brain. I don't know if you guys can make this out all right. Yeah, I I never intended you to be able to read that. I just wanted you to be able to see that there's a kind of path through the brain, and we know sort of where are the neurotransmitters sort of produced and where do they project into during experiences like grief. Socially dependent mammals like humans experience grief, panic, sadness when separated from caretakers, and they display behaviors like crying that reconnect them to their social world. Now, this is true for sheep, for cats, dogs, squirrels, and human beings. It's true for cetaceans too. You know, the sort of I suppose like killer whales, dolphins, this kind of stuff. They engage in what look like grieving type behaviors. This is a distinct circuit in the brain aroused by glutamate and corticotrophin-releasing hormone and a reduction in oxytocin and internal opioids. So what happens is the care system is how we're glued together with our parents originally. It's kind of amazing research. If you know that when a baby's born, well, the old method was you like spank it and take it out of the room and let nurses take care of it. But what are you supposed to do now? You're supposed to put it on the mother right away, right? So why do you have to have this touch relationship with the baby, both then and sort of ever after? It's because that's what triggers this flood of oxytocin. It triggers a flood of oxytocin in the mother and in the baby. And this oxytocin is what glues the offspring and the mother together. This is what bonding is comprised of. In fact, it's been experimented on repeatedly. If you take a sheep, and what happens is when the mother has the baby, they only have like a 1-hour bonding window. The mother has to sort of lick the afterbirth off the baby, and this contact is what, and all that sort of chemical stuff goes up into the Jacobson organ and into the brain, and that creates this oxytocin bond. You only have about an hour to do it. Like, so if scientists take away the baby from the mother, then and then bring the baby back 2 hours later, this oxytocin bonding window has closed, and the mother will reject the baby. Now, here's the amazing thing is, they can't do this on a human for ethical reasons, but you can inject oxytocin back into the mother sheep, and it reopens this bonding window, and they can bond again. Now, it turns out that that's exactly what's happening with you and your mother, and that's how human bonding occurs. In human beings, the bonding window is open much longer. It's like 1.5 to 2 years, but there's a lot of evidence that if you don't get that touch and that sort of contact with another caregiver, then your bonding window, in a sense, never develops properly. And we've had all kinds of cases of attachment disorder in kids who have been, sadly, they've been raised in orphanages where they've had little to no physical contact. So this, then much later in life, they have a hard time bonding with people. So what you do is when you see that that's really what pulls people together, these sort of neurotransmitter experiences of oxytocin and internal opioids, you see that when you lose somebody you love dies, there's a terrible need still, a chemical need for them. And you're not going to get them back, but religion sort of comes to the rescue, as it were. It's not the only social system that does this. Obviously, this group is an example of a group that's not religious, but still does this kind of stuff. When you lose somebody, religion comes in and brings a variety of consoling sort of tactics and strategies. So here are some of the ways in which religion manages sorrow. First, placebos and pain. We used to think that, nice stories might have a placebo effect, but that, it's not real medicine. And then we started to learn more about placebos. So it turns out that the latest research on placebos, and this is stuff that's been going on for the last 10 years, apparently placebos are way more powerful than we thought they were. So the fact that you think you're getting better or you think X, Y, or Z actually has a huge influence on the health of the organism. And there's some wonderful, I suppose this is maybe sort of an interesting experiment where they took people and they have this sort of pain test that psychologists will do where you have this bath of icy cold water and you have to put your arm in this bath of cold water, and they basically time how long can you leave your arm in this thing. And they use this same sort of measure when they found, for example, that some of these Tibetan monks who meditate all day long can leave their arm in for ridiculously long time. Well, for longer than the average person can leave their arm in because they appear to have more control over their sympathetic system and their pain system. But even what they also discovered was that if I tell you, hey, just put your arm in here, see how long you can last, let's say you can get up to 5 seconds or whatever. But if I tell another group, this is going to be painful, but it's actually very good for the muscles. It stimulates the muscles beautifully. Turns out you can leave your arm in this bath for much longer because you basically put this pain in a story that essentially made it seem like it was going to be valuable suffering. It was going to be worthwhile. You see the connection to religion here that I'm drawing. Religion is loaded with this stuff. Stories and practices that help people sustain and persevere. Soothing pro-social grooming. Okay, you've all seen how chimps groom each other by picking the bugs off each other. And this is, we used to think, oh, well, they're providing this function, which is just delousing each other or whatever it is. But in point of fact, that's not what they're doing. That's a sort of side issue. What they're actually doing is forging bonding alliances. This is how you get friends if you're a primate. You spend time picking the stuff off this other ape. And turns out that when this is happening, your oxytocin and internal opioids are going up, up, up. And later in life, in sort of some sort of conflict, let's say, you can count on this person. They have your back, so to speak. So pro-social grooming, we do this a lot, although you could get arrested if you sort of started to just sort of massage people that you wanted to be friends with. That's not a good policy. So a number of interesting evolutionary biologists, including Robin Dunbar, have argued that this is probably why speech evolved or language evolved for human beings. We used to think, oh, language evolved so that you can describe things and understand the world better. But in fact, language has this much more soothing, almost like a social massage quality to it. Think about motherese. How does a mother talk to its baby? It's this kind of sing-songy kind of thing. It's very soothing. And what we did, according to Dunbar, is as our societies got larger and more complex, we had to groom more and more people. And so things like song, music, singing, and speech, and then eventually storytelling became ways in which to sort of groom a large group of people all at once. And this is one of the things that religion is also very good at, is able to provide this pro-social grooming. So when you lose somebody and you have a memorial or a funeral, and then you have the things afterwards, there's a meal, there's oftentimes pro-social grooming, hugging, embracing, sharing of food, narratives about the person. All of this stuff is a way to sort of try to replace or build up that oxytocin and opioid cocktail within us. Existential shaping and gratitude. Religion is very good at trying to give us a picture of what our overall place is in the universe. And generally speaking, religion sort of emphasizes gratitude, first to the Creator, but also to your parents and to your family and to your community. It tends to be a fairly common theme in religion to sort of stress this position of gratitude. Social psychology suggests that gratitude is extremely helpful both for the psychology of the individual, and it increases sharing activity among sort of different people of the same sort of tribe. Magical thinking, optimism, and vitality. Magical thinking is sort of the obvious thing about religion, right? This mother who lost her son in this tragic way is thinking, I'm going to see him again and be with him again. So you lose somebody, and of course the Mass or the religion even sort of tells you you're going to see them again. I grew up an altar boy. I heard this over and over again. That's, in the cold light of reason, that seems absurd. And the scientists here and in myself find that slightly ridiculous. But when you're in this kind of pain, God, that sounds good. And that's the point, is that it sounds good and is helpful in how you feel at that moment. So it's restorative, even if your rational mind rejects it. This increases optimism. Optimism has been very strongly correlated with dopamine levels and vitality. One of the things we now know about depression is it's not feeling bad, it's a lack of vitality. And it turns out that dopamine levels are very low in depression. And this is one of the things that religion is oftentimes sort of indirectly trying to activate. And finally, reappraisals. Religion tells you a story about, sort of reappraises the situation or reframes the situation. You've lost your loved one, but religion tells you both you'll see them again, but it also tells you you can handle it, that you're in a larger framework that might be mythological to us in a sense, but also you can endure this. This is something you will survive. And these give people agency. When they feel like they have no control in life, it turns out that a sense of agency is very good for mental health. All right, now to the question I know you've all been chomping at, which is, but is it true? Don't tell me about how helpful it is. It seems like nonsense. All right, so here's a weirder argument, and I have a few minutes to give it, I see. I'm just in the yellow. On the left, you see, I've sort of divided this up into two different knowledge domains. On the left, beliefs in theology. So this is what I think most people think religion is about. And on the right is a set of categories that I'm calling actions and emotions. This is where I think the real work of religion is done. On the left, you can ask questions reasonably and coherently, like, is the belief or theology true or false? Is Jesus the Son of God? Was Mary a virgin? Totally legit to ask if that's true or false. And in fact, that will probably not pass most tests for truth or validity. I think on no scientific criteria would the virgin status of Mary seem like it was solid knowledge or science. So as far as I can tell, many of the claims of religion are probably false. We can ask, are they probable or improbable? Totally reasonable thing to ask. And finally, are they coherent or incoherent? Like some of the claims of religion are just absurd on the face of it, or they actually are inconsistent with other claims within the same religion. So asking about truth is totally legitimate when you're asking about the beliefs of religion. But notice, when I switch to actions and emotions, truth criteria does not apply to actions and emotions. These are the criteria. It's either helpful or harmful that you think there's a God. The belief that someone's watching out for you is either strong or weak. The feeling that you are loved is either adaptive or deleterious. Feelings are not susceptible to truth criteria. And this is pretty clear if you think about, even in a dream, like, have you ever had a nightmare and you wake up and you're like utterly filled with fear? You're like sweating, and in every way you're in a total panic. And maybe it even takes like an hour for you to calm down. That's because your emotion is real even when the experience is false. So you're in a dream. It's not real, it's not true, but your emotions don't care. Their job is just to help you survive. So I guess my definitive statement on this would be, very famously, Christopher Hitchens said, he said, well, if your friends are sort of trying to turn you on to religion and make you religious, then he says, since the claims of religion are false, then it's false consolation to believe that you're going to see your son again after they're killed. And as far as I can tell, this is just to misunderstand the nature of consolation, because consolation is a feeling. It's neither false nor true. The claim of religion might be false or true, but not the feeling. And so my point is to try to turn us toward this other domain of adaptive feelings rather than truth claims. Now, how can I do that? As a Darwinian, here's my argument. In the same thing, you've got sort of a chart on the left and a chart on the right. On the left, you have what I would call the neocortex, or the brain's goal or sort of agenda as a truth tracker. One of the things you want to do in life, and one of the things that helped us tremendously as a species, is figure out what's true and false, and then act on it. So the brain is a prediction processor, right? And what you want to do is have the most accurate model possible. Where does this thrive best? It's obviously in the sciences. So for example, what kind of quarks are in a protein? Do butterflies have over 300 chromosomes? Is there enough oxygen here for me to survive? Was the world created in 6 days? Those are truth tracker questions. Religion does not do well here. It's not my goal to defend religion on these grounds. On the other hand, this is the other domain you actually live in. This is the social navigator mind. This is where you spend most of your day, not over in the truth tracker section. So here you also have a prediction processor, but it's sort of emotionally, it's embodied. It's sort of in the body. Here you're trying to successfully navigate the social world. So for example, what is that angry person going to do next? Who is dominant in this room? Will this person be a reliable friend or ally? Is that person in pain? How can I help? Is he an enemy? Those are all about the social world and adapting to the social world. So if you think about this from a Darwinian point of view, the goal in evolution is just to basically create progeny. That's what it means. That's what fitness means, is you have offspring. And if religious beliefs that help you navigate your social world help you to basically procreate and leave more offspring, you are winning the Darwinian game. So I know that's not the criteria that most of us want to apply, because on that model, really smart people often have less and less kids. And it's kind of the stupid people that procreate more. So that's just a little troubling, but it is a sort of necessary implication of the Darwinian, approach. All right, so I'm going to draw my formal comments to a conclusion there, but then I always sort of enjoy the back and forth of questions and stuff and the discussion afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. Extremely informative, and you're doing on a professional level what I've been doing for years on an amateur level, just out of pure curiosity. So the question is, I read some articles based on research that they had done that showed that there was chemical response, or I don't know how the exact language. So when people think of God, and when they pray to God, or when they pray to Jesus, what's going on in the brain is the same exact thing as when they're talking to a friend. And so when people derisively say, oh, you've got an invisible friend, it turns out scientifically that actually is, he's like, even though he's imaginary and non-existent, chemically, he's your best friend, or she. Have you run across this kind of thing in your research, and has it applied?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the person to sort of look at for this material is there's a woman in California named I think Tanya Luhrmann is her name, and she's Luhr Luhrmann, M-E-N, and she has been doing empirical studies of people, not so much brain neuroscience studies, but empirical studies of evangelicals who see that Jesus is their co-pilot, in one of the most interesting stories she tells is that many young women in evangelical groups will develop this kind of habit of mind of thinking about, I know this is going to sound funny, but sort of going on a date with Jesus. And they sort of work it through imaginatively, like all the details of it and the conversation and so forth. And if you do this enough, then, like you said, that imaginary friend actually becomes very close to a real friend in many ways. There's an extra step, which is that if because this doesn't happen automatically. You sort of have to train up to it, I think. There's a step in which if you are raised in this kind of a community, then there's a certain kind of, we're all talking to ourselves all the time, and having these kind of, like in the shower this morning, I'm like having an argument with somebody in my head, and always winning, of course. But if you do this enough, then certain kinds of internal dialogue rises to the level of, oh, this is God now talking to me. So, and you're sort of coached into recognizing certain kinds of internal conversations as being of this particular gravitas, And this is how the community builds what looks to the outsider like a crazy kind of thing, where you're in a personal relationship with an imaginary being, but this is how it works. And so I would recommend her work, because she's done excellent work on that. Yeah.
Right here.
Hi.
As far as religion, you seem to say it's a God, more of a theistic. If we take away the gods, the Christians, the Muslims, the Hindus, and just go with humanity and humanism, to where the power of religion is not in a God, it is in the power of humanity. Humanity really is not considered, humanism is starting to be conceived as a religion, but it's really not a religion. Could you just say about, if we avoid the gods and stick with people and do everything that the religions do, all the comfort, the solace, the support, the nurturing, all of that, but on a human level instead of a supernatural level? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to that, of course. I consider myself a humanist, and for those reasons, exactly. However, I would raise sort of two caveats. One is what I learned spending so much time in the developing world is that the view you're articulating there is a very small sort of option. It's a wonderful option for a very small set of prosperous, privileged people, us. If you look around the rest of the world, they don't have medicine like we have. They don't even have like heat like to fight the weather like we have. There's a sense in which we are in a place where we have the luxury of cutting out the gods and instead engaging in the cultural activities and the social activities that give us those feelings. So I'm a big proponent of, I think a lot of the kind of positive social and emotional management that you get in religion can now be gotten here in Chicago through art. This is why I go see the symphony. You can go to an opera. You can go see the jazz band, go to the Art Institute, see paintings, do art. All of that stuff activates the emotions and glues people together in ways that religion does. But that's not an option for the average Cambodian person. When I was living in Cambodia, there were people in Phnom Penh who had been saving their whole lives to go what is essentially like a 2-hour boat ride to see Angkor Wat. And they're like, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to have enough for that. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that that's an option for us. And the rest of the world doesn't have that option yet. They're a long way from that. They don't even have the medical advantages we have. Like, it's very common in the developing world to see people. I remember my son and I were living in China, and we were walking down the street. I would take him to preschool. This was in Shanghai. And on the street there was a woman, and she would beg, and her head was, I'm not kidding, her head was this big. And she was hydrocephalic. She had been born, with water on the brain. And you and I would just get a shunt in the back of the head. You never even knew you had this. It's probably some of the people in here had it, didn't even know it, because modern medicine eliminated this as a form of suffering for us. Her family had built a wooden brace to hold her head up so she wouldn't break her neck. And my son was like, hey, there's the big head lady. It was just part of life in the developing world. So I think we have to think about religion in that context, in which case I think they don't have a lot of the same options we have. The second caveat I would say is that even myself, I consider myself educated, prosperous, have access to medicine. There are forms of suffering that I have undergone for which I have no scientific alleviation. And I hate this, people say like, well, religion's the opiate of the masses, or you're only religious when you're in the foxhole. Well, those of us who've been in, the figurative foxhole are like, fine. That's when I got very religious, was at a moment when, in the emergency room with my son, when science did not know what to do. That's a sort of a human response. That doesn't mean religion's true, but it does mean that secular science has not provided us an alleviation for all the forms of vulnerability that we have. That's the point.
Right here.
Yeah.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for your presentation, which I found...
Is that Danny?
Yes, it is.
Danny.
And as you know, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I found this really fascinating. And my question follows actually very closely upon your answer to the last question. So this argument that religion is necessary for most humans, maybe not all humans, but most ordinary people, has been around for a long time. I mean, it's a classic Dostoevskian problem, right? What happens if people don't have that belief in God? Everything will turn to chaos and disorder. Now, the science that you draw on, the evolutionary biology and the affective neuroscience, is bearing out, in a sense, this Dostoevskian anxiety about religion. But my question is this. I imagine you're familiar with a book by Phil Zuckerman called Society Without God, What the Least Religious Nations Can Tell Us About Contentment. Are you?
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. It came out in 2010. It's sort of an ethnographic study, mostly about Denmark. The question is, are we now seeing in very recent human history societies like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, the UK, whole swaths we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who seem to be largely godless. No religion does not figure in their lives, and they seem to be doing really well on all the indices that you are emphasizing that religion tends to help humans as a species with. So is there a sense in which those societies are culturally or perhaps even neuroscientifically evolving out of these more primal needs that I think your analysis illuminates in a really interesting way? But are there these outliers? Is there a counterforce to your argument?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I don't know that particular book, but I know that. I've heard of it. I haven't read it. That argument, I think, is persuasive. That Scandinavian countries they score high on the happiness quotient. Although interestingly enough, so do some fairly religious places like Bhutan, for example. My own sense is that, we might be all evolving in a giant progress story that someone like Steven Pinker might tell, where the Enlightenment Project is going to pick up all of these people that I'm describing who are suffering and eventually give them, medicine and education, and eventually they're going to attain the levels of advanced prosperity that, say, Denmark has. I guess my response to that is we're a long way off. That's a promissory note. And in the meantime, religion is the best life preserver that we have. It's almost like saying, this is kind of a bad analogy, but this is why people will dismiss religion as an opiate of the masses, and yet I'm actually arguing now, let me be careful here, I'm not pro-opiates, but I do think that the constellations of religion, and look, you're thinking of opiates like there's an opiate crisis and people are, taking fentanyl and stuff, and of course, bad. But your brain is loaded with internal opioids. You have heroin in your brain, essentially, and social life, cultural life is designed to activate it in ways that bring us together. So one of the things we know is that friendship increases oxytocin and internal opioids. And my argument has been that religion does this too. So when I look around the developing world, I feel very nervous about saying, hey, drop your Buddhism, drop your Christianity, let's go whole hog on the sciences and we'll end up like Denmark. And the reason why I'm cautious about that is that Chairman Mao tried that, and it didn't go well. And arguably, the Soviet Union tried this, and it didn't go well. And having lived in Cambodia, what Pol Pot did was, Pol Pot was like, hey, we saw Chairman Mao do the Great Leap Forward, and it took like a decade or two. We're going to do it in like 2 years. That was what they were thinking, the Khmer Rouge. So they're like, let's get rid of all religion. So they basically burned the temples down. They were killing monks. Interestingly, they would disrobe them and then kill them because even the army was so afraid of that saffron color, which means the Buddha. And China did this, of course, during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. But in my experience now, having lived in China and in Cambodia, Buddhism provides way more consolation and actual help and healing than the kind of purely secular humanism that was on offer at that time. Now, we could argue that was the wrong way to do it, and that was the wrong kind of secular humanism, but at least we have an experiment. And the experiment, we have a variety of experiments in the 20th century in particular, and they didn't go well. One of the things that oftentimes you do in communist secularized movements is you try to break the bonding of the family so that the individual will then have greater allegiance to the party. And you saw this in China, you see it in Cambodia, it happens everywhere. That is, in my own view, that is never going to work. That's going to cause tremendous misery. And as soon as you stop killing people for that, the family returns as the elemental unit of social organization because of the bonds, the emotional stuff I'm talking about. So I wish you were right, but I'm a little pessimistic about the march of progress. And in the meantime, religion is, in its more benign forms, is extremely helpful while we work on the so-called Enlightenment project.
In the case of the woman who lost the son, since no one could get inside that woman's mind, we can never know for sure what contributed to her mental breakdown or her recovery. And my question for you is, isn't it possible that religion might have contributed to her difficulty for dealing with such a horrific scenario, in that her belief of a God that not only didn't prevent the horrible killing and mutilation of her son, but apparently it was his will that happened. And I would think that I think if I believe that, I would be even more devastated. Isn't that a possibility?
Yeah, that's a possibility, and that's why I'm an atheist. Because I think the problem of evil cannot be surmounted in my head. So I agree with you, but it is pretty clear that is not what she thought. She thought, as most, I think, religious believers think, that as painful and as horrible as this is, there is some higher good or purpose that God has for my son and me and life in general. I find it very hard to wrap my head around that. I can hear that you do too, but we would be, I think, willfully blind not to notice that other people are able to make that calculation. And that's how they think of it. In fact, that's how they console themselves. In fact, you'll hear this whenever you point out to somebody who's a believer, like, well, look at the Holocaust or something, or this kid who was stabbed to death. You'll oftentimes find this very irritating response, which is that, God works in mysterious ways, that it's a mystery. How can you understand it with our puny mind, For me, it's a deal breaker. But it's pretty obvious that the vast majority of people are able to do that sort of cognitive dissonance better than I can, better than you can. And it's not up to us to say, look at how foolish that is or how stupid that is. They're simply able to reconcile things that I cannot. And so that's what I think is happening in those cases. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really wonderful. I am a huge fan of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the studies that sort of show that these religious practices and beliefs and spirituality lead to longer life?
Yeah, I mean, all I know is just what I've seen in terms of, you can sort of punch this, you can Google this and you'll see the same studies that I saw. There's some evidence, it's not like amazing, it's not like people live 20 years longer or anything, but it's like on average like a year or two longer if you're religious. And of course, what we have there are correlations, and the question is, what are the exact causes of this? So some psychology, as it's developed in the 20th century, is loath to speculate as to why you live longer, because we want hard empirical data that we can observe, and that's going inside the head of somebody to see. But some have speculated that it basically reduces stress enough that you don't succumb to the kinds of diseases that stress tends to accelerate. So that's basically the logic of it. That's the argument for it. And you see this among other, you can see in certain ethnic groups too, you will see that people who undergo very high degrees of stress because of poverty or race or whatever, oftentimes the argument is the lifespan is lower. Frequently, it could be a mix of diet, but it also is frequently cited to be a case of too much stress. The levels of stress are too high.
So I'm interested in your take on the religious, I don't know the word for it, that we should procreate and have lots of children, and that because that was once an evolutionary advantage, and today you see this fight over abortion and all of the related things, and we know that we're in a different place now on our planet in terms of survival. So what's your take on that?
Well, there again, I think the idea of reducing population tends to correspond with higher levels of economic prosperity and education. So where you see education and prosperity and wealth growing, you see child numbers, you see procreation levels going down. But again, we shouldn't sort of think in a bubble here about life in Chicago, you know. In other parts of the country, the procreative urge is still very strong. There is this cultural sort of premium placed on having large families, and there's this religious premium on having large families and protecting every kind of sort of conception with regard to sort of anti-abortion and so forth. So I would say that we haven't sort of gone past that in total, like as a culture. We're still very much, I think, as a country looking to procreate. And I also think that if you look around the rest of the world, population numbers are increasing. Like the reason why Islam is oftentimes, you've heard this, that Islam is the highest or the fastest growing religion. You've probably heard this, no? It's not because Islam is offering people something they can't get from anything else. It's because the population growth numbers are just going through the roof. Like, so you're Muslim because your parents are Muslim. And if you're having a lot of babies, the growth of the religion looks like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I would say at the global stage, population and the pursuit of higher population is still alive and well, particularly in areas like in the developing world. Places like Japan, people are not getting married and procreating. There's very high levels of education and economic prosperity there. So I guess if your larger question is like, we're not cavemen anymore. We have culture and cities and medicine. And I think that has had an impact on procreation. But ultimately, I do think that built into religion, traditional religions of the Iron Age, like the monotheisms that we have, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, is this impulse to procreate. Because, in a sense, religions are, I know this is going to sound weird, well, it won't sound weird to this audience, but religions are, as Daniel Dennett and Dawkins have suggested, are basically like combinations of memes. That, you know, like in the same way that my kid gets a meme and passes it all around to his friends and they're all laughing at some funny thing on their phone, religion basically has a way of making more of itself. It spreads through a population horizontally and vertically because it goes out through evangelical means and it goes down through having children. So religion is like a set of memes that basically replicates. And the ones that promote procreation replicate better than the ones that don't. Okay. Cool.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. You referred to yourself in your talk at one point as an agnostic. And I wondered if there are still any persuasive counter-arguments for you that maybe there is still some organizing higher power.
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's really two kinds of agnostics, right? There's like, I don't know and I don't care. And then there's like, I don't know and I'm really, you know, concerned and interested and it's a live issue for me. And I'm of that second category. So for me, religion is endlessly fascinating culturally, but also I think the transcendent experience that you have oftentimes in religion is something that I've experienced and many of you guys have experienced in things like the arts, for example. And so that intrigues me. Why is it that there are these very unique experiences where the little ego seems to explode and go away, and the religious mind would say, well, you're having a communion with God, or the absolute, or I suppose the Buddhists would say the nothing. But in any case, it's a kind of peak experience, and it's strange and not like regular psychology. So that intrigues me, and I'm always interested in really more in spirituality as a psychological experience, and whether or not that confirms the reality of things outside of me, I'm sort of less interested in that question. But I'm obsessed right now with this painter. He's an American painter named George Inness. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's not well known at all. But he paints landscapes, and he was really influenced by religious spiritualism at the time, late 1800s. And I see something in his paintings that looks like that he's captured the spiritual dimension of nature. And I don't know what to do with that. You know, it doesn't really fit with my scientific worldview, so I just, like the song said at the beginning, I just let it be. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. My question is motivated by something I have learned since I've been here in this society. I'm part of the membership committee, and I have been very intrigued by meeting young adults who are curious about our community, who talk about growing up in a very strong faith community of whatever flavor. And one of the things as young adults they realize as they've moved away from that they feel they don't have an internal sense of how to think about right and wrong, or their own sense of whether it's morality or ethics or whatever, that they were given an external structure through dogma and whatever, and once they didn't make sense on your left side of your picture, they were struggling, I think, on the right side. Like, how do I now navigate the right side of all your charts, having given up the left side? And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, they're not independent of each other. They have feedback to each other.
No, that's a great point. And that's a great point. In fact, it reminds me of when I was at the Creation Museum, one of the things because I interviewed the director there, Ken Ham, and when they had this exhibit there, it was sort of the culminating exhibit, and it was like you look into an American home, and it was like it was a diorama, and you look in through 3 windows, and the first window was you look in and you see like young boys looking at porn and doing drugs, and then the next window is a young girl crying with like abortion pamphlets around her. And then the last window was parents arguing. And then there was a giant wrecking ball that was sort of smashing into their house, which was causing all of this misery. And on the wrecking ball it said, "The earth is billions of years old." And Ken Ham thought that if you think the world is billions of years old, you'll be so bereft of hope that you're just going to start shooting up and getting abortions, and so you're right. Like, they believe that that sort of indicative description of the world as being for them, 6,000 years old, is what the morality is based upon. And all I can say to that is I think this is just a category mistake, but it's a common one, It's real life. Yeah, it's real life. It's very common, and instead, I don't think your sense of morality and ethics needs to have like a really accurate sort of underpinning backstory. It demonstrates its value in the here and now and doesn't need a universal cosmic picture to make sense out of it, but clearly the average religious person thinks that way. Although I will quickly point out that it's really more the fundamentalist that goes this route. I think the moderate mainstream religious person is not that interested in these origin stories. They're more interested in using religion on a daily, weekly basis to get through life. So, when push comes to shove, they'll probably say something like, yeah, Genesis, whatever. But, the average Catholic, for example, has made their peace with science hundreds of years ago. They're not like, well, let's see what the Bible says about the Big Bang. They know, as Galileo said, that the Holy Spirit is not to teach you how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven. That was Galileo's comment. That there are two different domains. The sciences function here and describe the world. Religion helps us with values and ethics. And for Catholics, mainstream Catholics, and I think mainstream Protestants, that's been a pretty good division of labor, whereas fundamentalists want them back together again.
We have time for one last question, and then we'll continue the conversation outside.
This is a follow-on from what you were just talking about. How do you think of something like a 7-step program? You take these people that are kind of lost. They're not particularly attached to religion. So then you try to indoctrinate them to get them to move forward. Do you think there could be a humanist version of recovery or answers to addiction? And do you actually think that 7-step programs are essentially counterproductive because there's none of the support that started there? It's all just, indoctrination into here's a group you can be part of and a way forward.
I'm a big fan of 7-step programs. I think that they actually have most of the elements we've been describing here in a way, because I have some personal experience with this in my family. I know that when you're feeling, like you need a drink, let's say, or something, you're feeling weak given your addiction, you can go down to a meeting, and all over in most major cities there's a place where you can meet up. And what you have is something that is highly therapeutic. It has belief structures to it, like you said, and I think many people have balked at the last sort of, well, I've got to believe there's a higher power or whatever. Can't we do it without that? But that's just one of the things that the group is able to achieve, and I think it creates community. It's loose. It's a loose community. It's not very tight. But it's very helpful in the moment when you need what I think is not just ideas or ways to think, but you need habits that help you actually overcome the craving you're having right here and now. So religion is really good. That's why you have to meet once a week. Otherwise, religion would just be like, here's a pamphlet, take this, learn the ideas, see you in 10 years when you need us again. No, you meet regularly because religion is, like all other social knowledge, is a result of habit, is habitual repetition of behaviors that rewrite a kind of second nature over your original nature, which you're having trouble with. And that, I think, is something 7-step programs do well. I'm definitely no expert on it, but that's just my take off the top of my head. Okay, thank you very much.